There's an old saying, once you trade magic for fact, there are no tradebacks. This is a natural part of becoming an adult. Sometimes we lose that childlike ability to imagine and dream. But what of the adults who become more entrenched in the power of the divine? The omnipotent power that is witchcraft. Witchcraft is a broad term that varies culturally and societally, and thus can be difficult to define with precision. Therefore, cross-cultural assumptions about the meaning or significance of the term should be applied with caution. Historically, and in most traditional cultures worldwide, notably in Africa and in traditional Native American communities, the term is commonly associated with those who use metaphysical means to cause harm to the innocent. In the modern era, especially among younger, urbane and white peoples in America and Europe, the word may more commonly refer to benign or positive practices of modern paganism, where it may refer to a divinatory or healing role. Belief in witchcraft is often present within societies and groups whose cultural framework includes a magical worldview. The concept of witchcraft and the belief in its existence have persisted throughout recorded history. They have been present or central at various times and in many diverse forms among cultures and religions worldwide, including both primitive and highly advanced cultures, and continue to have an important role in many cultures today. Historically, the predominant concept of witchcraft in the Western world derives from Old Testament laws against witchcraft and entered the mainstream when belief in witchcraft gained church approval in the early modern period. It posits a theosophical conflict between good and evil, where witchcraft was generally evil and often associated with the devil and devil worship. This culminated in deaths, torture, and scapegoating, casting blame for human misfortune, and many years of large-scale witch trials and witch hunts, especially in Protestant Europe, before largely ceasing during the European Age of Enlightenment. Christian views in the modern day are diverse and cover the gamut of views from intense belief and opposition, especially by Christian fundamentalists, to non-belief, and even approval in some churches. From the mid-20th century, witchcraft, sometimes called contemporary witchcraft to clearly distinguish it from older beliefs, became the name of a branch of modern paganism. It is most notably practiced in the Wiccan and modern witchcraft traditions, and is no longer practiced in secrecy. The Western mainstream Christian view is far from the only societal perspective about witchcraft. Many cultures worldwide continue to have widespread practices and cultural beliefs that are loosely translated into English as witchcraft, although the English translation masks a very great diversity in their forms, magical beliefs, practices, and place in their societies. During the age of colonialism, many cultures across the globe were exposed to the modern Western world via colonialism, usually accompanied and often preceded by intensive Christian missionary activity. In these cultures, beliefs that were related to witchcraft and magic were influenced by the prevailing Western concepts of the time. Witch hunts, scapegoating, and the killing or shunning of suspected witches still occur in the modern era. Suspicion of modern medicine due to beliefs about illness being due to witchcraft also continues in many countries to this day, with tragic healthcare consequences. HIV, AIDS, and Ebola virus disease are two examples of often lethal infectious disease epidemics whose medical care and containment has been severely hampered by regional beliefs in witchcraft. Other severe medical conditions whose treatment is hampered in this way include tuberculosis, leprosy, epilepsy, and the common severe bacterial Baruli ulcer. In anthropological terminology, witches differ from sorcerers in that they don't use physical tools or actions to curse. Their maleficium is perceived as extending from some intangible inner quality, and one may be unaware of being a witch, or may have been convinced of his/her nature by the suggestion of others. This definition was pioneered in a study of Central African magical beliefs by E. Evans Pritchard, who cautioned that it might not correspond with normal English usage. Historians of European witchcraft have found the anthropological definition difficult to apply to European witchcraft, where witches could equally use, or be accused of using, physical techniques, as well as some who really had attempted to cause harm by thought alone. European witchcraft is seen by historians and anthropologists as an ideology for explaining misfortune. However, this ideology has manifested in diverse ways, as described in this programme. It is argued here that the medical arts played a significant and sometimes pivotal role in the witchcraft controversies of 17th century New England. Not only were physicians and surgeons the principal professional arbiters for determining natural versus preternatural signs and symptoms of disease, they occupied key legislative, judicial, and ministerial roles relating to witchcraft proceedings. 46 male physicians, surgeons, and apothecaries are named in court transcripts or other contemporary source materials relating to New England witchcraft. These practitioners served on coroners' inquests, performed autopsies, took testimony, issued writs, wrote letters, or committed people to prison, in addition to diagnosing and treating patients. Some practitioners are simply mentioned in passing. Where belief in malicious magical practices exists, such practitioners are typically forbidden by law, as well as hated and feared by the general populace, while beneficial magic is tolerated or even accepted wholesale by the people, even if the orthodox establishment opposes it. Probably the most widely known characteristic of a witch was the ability to cast a spell. Spell being the word used to signify the means employed to carry out a magical action. A spell could consist of a set of words, a formula or verse, or a ritual action, or any combination of these. Spells traditionally were cast by many methods, such as by the inscription of runes or sigils on an object to give it magical powers, by the immolation or binding of a wax or clay image, also known as a poppet, of a person, to affect him or her magically, by the recitation of incantations, by the performance of physical rituals, by the employment of magical herbs as amulets or potions, by gazing at mirrors, swords, or other specula, or scrying for purposes of divination, and by many other means. Sometimes witchcraft can get incredibly dark. Such is the case with necromancy. Strictly speaking, necromancy is the practice of conjuring the spirits of the dead for divination or prophecy, although the term has also been applied to raising the dead for other purposes. The biblical Witch of Endor performed it, and it is among the witchcraft practices condemned by Ælfric of Eynsham. Witches still go to crossroads and to heathen burials with their delusive magic and call to the devil, and he comes to them in the likeness of the man that is buried there, as if he arise from death. In Christianity and Islam, sorcery came to be associated with heresy and apostasy, and to be viewed as evil. among the Catholics, Protestants, and secular leadership of the European late medieval, early modern period. Fears about witchcraft rose to fever pitch, and sometimes led to large-scale witch hunts. The key century was the 15th, which saw a dramatic rise in awareness and terror of witchcraft, culminating in the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum, but prepared by such fanatical popular preachers as Bernardino of Siena. Throughout this time, it was increasingly believed that Christianity was engaged in an apocalyptic battle against the devil and his secret army of witches, who had entered into a diabolical pact. In total, tens or hundreds of thousands of people were executed, and others were imprisoned, tortured, banished, and had lands and possessions confiscated. The majority of those accused were women, though in some regions the majority were men. In early modern Scots, the word warlock came to be used as the male equivalent of witch, which can be male or female, but is used predominantly for females. The Malleus Maleficarum, Latin for Hammer of the Witches, was a witch-hunting manual written in 1486 by two German monks, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. It was used by both Catholics and Protestants for several hundred years, outlining how to identify a witch, what makes a woman more likely than a man to be a witch, how to put a witch on trial, and how to punish a witch. The book defines a witch as evil, and typically female. The book became the handbook for secular courts throughout Renaissance Europe, but was not used by the Inquisition, which even cautioned against relying on the work. Throughout the early modern period, the English term witch was not exclusively negative in meaning, and could also indicate cunning folk. As Alan Macfarlane noted, there were a number of interchangeable terms for these practitioners: white, good, or unbinding witches, blessers, wizards, sorcerers. However, cunning man and wise man were the most frequent. The contemporary Reginald Scott explained, "At this day, it is indifferent to say in the English tongue, 'she is a witch' or 'she is a wise woman.' Folk magicians throughout Europe were often viewed ambivalently by communities and were considered as capable of harming as of healing, which could lead to their being accused as witches in the negative sense. Many English witches convicted of consorting with demons seems to have been cunning folk, whose fairy familiars had been demonized. Many French devins guérisses, or divine healers as they were known, were accused of witchcraft, and over one half the accused witches in Hungary seem to have been healers. Some of the healers and diviners, historically accused of witchcraft, have considered themselves mediators between the mundane and spiritual worlds, roughly equivalent to shamans. Such people described their contacts with fairies, spirits often involving out-of-body experiences, and travelling through the realms of an other world. Hungarian ethnographer and folklorist Eva Ports states that reasons for accusations of witchcraft fall into 4 general categories. A person was caught in the act of positive or negative sorcery. A well-meaning sorcerer or healer lost their clients or the authorities' trust. A person did nothing more than gain the enmity of their neighbours. A person was reputed to be a witch and surrounded with an aura of witch believers or occultism. Ports identifies 3 varieties of witch in popular belief. The neighbourhood witch, or social witch, a witch who curses a neighbour following some conflict. The magical or sorcerer witch, either a professional healer, sorcerer, seer or midwife, or a person who has, through magic, increased her fortune to the perceived detriment of a neighbouring household. Due to neighbourly or community rivalries and the ambiguity between positive and negative magic, such individuals can become labelled as witches. The supernatural or night witch, portrayed in court narratives as a demon appearing in visions and dreams. Neighbourhood witches are the product of neighbourhood tensions and are found only in self-sufficient serf village communities where the inhabitants largely rely on each other. Such accusations follow the breaking of some social norm, such as the failure to return a borrowed item, and any person part of the normal social exchange could potentially fall under suspicion. Claims of sorcerer witches and supernatural witches could arise out of social tensions, but not exclusively. The supernatural witch in particular often had nothing to do with communal conflict, but expressed tensions between the human and supernatural worlds. And in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, such supernatural witches became an ideology explaining calamities that befell entire communities. Belief in witchcraft continues to be present today in some societies, and accusations of witchcraft are the trigger for serious forms of violence, including murder. Such incidents are common in countries such as Burkina Faso, Ghana, India, Kenya, Malawi, Nepal, and Tanzania. Accusations of witchcraft are sometimes linked to personal disputes, jealousy, and conflicts between neighbours or family members over land or inheritance. Witchcraft-related violence is often discussed as a serious issue in the broader context of violence against women. In Tanzania, about 500 older women are murdered each year following accusations of witchcraft or accusations of being a witch. Apart from extrajudicial violence, state-sanctioned violence also occurs in some jurisdictions. For instance, in Saudi Arabia, practicing witchcraft and sorcery is a crime punishable by death, and the country has executed people for this crime in 2011, 2012 and 2014. Children who live in some regions of the world, such as parts of Africa, are also vulnerable to violence that is related to witchcraft accusations. Such incidents have also occurred in immigrant communities in the UK, including the much publicised case of the murder of Victoria Kalimbe. During the 20th century, interest in witchcraft in English-speaking and European countries began to increase, inspired particularly by Margaret Murray's theory of a pan-European witch cult, originally published in 1921, since discredited by further careful historical research. Interest was intensified, however, by Gerald Gardner's claim in 1954 in Witchcraft Today that a form of witchcraft still existed in England. The truth of Gardner's claim is now disputed too. The Wicca that Gardner initially taught was a witchcraft religion, having a lot in common with Margaret Murray's hypothetically posited cult of the 1920s. Indeed, Murray wrote an introduction to Gardner's Witchcraft Today, in effect putting her stamp of approval on it. Wicca is now practiced as a religion of an initiatory secret society nature with positive ethical principles, organised into autonomous covens and led by a high priesthood. There is also a large, eclectic Wiccan movement of individuals and groups who share key Wiccan beliefs, but have no initiatory connection or affiliation with traditional Wicca. Wiccan writings and ritual show borrowings from a number of sources, including 19th and 20th century ceremonial magic, the medieval grimoire known as the Key of Solomon, Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, and pre-Christian religions. Right now, there are just over 200,000 people who practice Wicca in the United States. Wiccan literature has been described as aiding the empowerment of young women through its lively portrayal of female protagonists. Part of the recent growth in neo-pagan religions has been attributed to the strong media presence of fictional works such as the Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Harry Potter series, with their depictions of witchcraft. Widespread accessibility to related material through internet media, such as chat rooms and forums, is also thought to be driving this development. Wiccan beliefs are currently often found to be compatible with liberal ideals such as the Green Movement, and particularly with feminism, by providing young women with means for empowerment and for control of their own lives. This is the case particularly in North America, due to the strong presence of feminist ideals. The 2002 study, Enchanted Feminism, The Reclaiming Witches of San Francisco, suggests that Wiccan religion represents the second wave of feminism that has also been redefined as a religious movement. Traditional witchcraft is a term used to refer to a variety of contemporary forms of witchcraft. Pagan studies scholar Ethan Doyle White described it as a broad movement of aligned magico-religious groups who reject any relation to Gardnerianism and the wider Wiccan movement, claiming older, more traditional roots. Although typically united by a shared aesthetic rooted in European folklore, the traditional craft contains within its ranks a rich and varied array of occult groups, from those who follow a contemporary pagan path that is suspiciously similar to Wicca, to those who adhere to Luciferianism. According to British traditional witch Michael Howard, the term refers to any non-Gardnerian, non-Alexandrian, non-Wiccan, or pre-modern form of the craft, especially if it has been inspired by historical forms of witchcraft and folk magic. Another definition was offered by Daniel A. Schulk, the current magister of the cultist Sabati, when he proclaimed that traditional witchcraft refers to a coterie of initiatory lineages of ritual magic, spellcraft, and devotional mysticism. Some forms of traditional witchcraft are the fairy tradition, Cochrane's craft, and the Sabbatic craft. Modern witchcraft considers Satanism to be the dark side of Christianity, rather than a branch of Wicca. The character of Satan referenced in Satanism exists only in the theology of the three Abrahamic religions, and Satanism arose as, and occupies the role of, a rebellious counterpart to Christianity, in which all is permitted and the self is central. Christianity can be characterized as having the diametrically opposite views to these. Such beliefs become more visibly expressed in Europe after the Enlightenment, when works such as Milton's Paradise Lost were described anew by Romantics who suggested that they presented the biblical Satan as an allegory representing crisis of faith, individualism, free will, wisdom, and enlightenment. A few works from that time also begin to directly present Satan in a less negative light, such as Letters from the Earth. The two major trends are theistic Satanism and atheistic Satanism. The former venerates Satan as a supernatural, patriarchal deity, while the latter views Satan as merely a symbolic embodiment of certain human traits. Organised groups began to emerge in the mid-20th century, including the 1948's Ophite Cultus Satanus and 1966's The Church of Satan. After seeing Margaret Murray's book, The God of the Witches, the leader of Ophite Cultus Satanus, Herbert Arthur Sloane, said he realised that the horned god was Satan, or Sathanus. Sloane also corresponded with his contemporary Gerald Gardner, founder of the Wicca religion, and implied that his views of Satan and the horned god were not necessarily in conflict with Gardner's approach. However, he did believe that, while Gnosis referred to knowledge and Wicca referred to wisdom, modern witches had fallen away from the true knowledge, and instead had begun worshipping a fertility god, a reflection of the creator god. He wrote that the largest existing body of witches who are true Satanists would be the Yazidis. Sloane highly recommended the book The Gnostic Religion, and sections of it were sometimes read at ceremonies. It was estimated that there were up to 100,000 Satanists worldwide by 2006, twice the number estimated in 1990. Satanistic beliefs have been largely permitted as a valid expression of religious belief in the West. For example, they were allowed in the British Royal Navy in 2004, and an appeal was considered in 2005 for religious status as a right of prisoners by the Supreme Court of the United States. Contemporary Satanism is mainly an American phenomenon, though it began to reach Eastern Europe in the 1990s, around the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. Luciferianism, on the other hand, is a belief system and does not revere the devil figure, or most characteristics typically affixed to Satan. Rather, Lucifer in this context is seen as one of many morning stars, a symbol of enlightenment, independence, and human progression. Madeleine Montalban was an English witch who adhered to a specific form of Luciferianism, which revolved around the veneration of Lucifer, or Lumiel, whom she considered to be a benevolent angelic being who had aided humanity's development. Within her order, she emphasized that her followers discover their own personal relationship with the angelic beings, including Lumiel. Although initially seeming favourable to Gerald Gardner, by the mid-1960s she had become hostile towards him and his Gardnerian tradition, considering him to be a dirty old man and sexual pervert. She also expressed hostility to another prominent pagan witch of the period, Charles Cardell, although in the 1960s became friends with the two witches at the forefront of the Alexandrian Wiccan tradition, Alex Sanders and his wife Maxine Sanders, who adopted some of her Luciferian angelic practices. In contemporary times, Luciferian witches exist within traditional witchcraft. The belief in sorcery and its practice seem to have been widespread in the ancient Near East and Nile Valley. It played a conspicuous role in the cultures of ancient Egypt and in Babylonia. The latter tradition included an Akkadian anti-witchcraft ritual, the Maklu. A section from the Code of Hammurabi from about 2000 BC prescribes, "If a man has put a spell upon another man, and it is not justified, he upon whom the spell is laid shall go to the holy river. Into the holy river shall he plunge. If the holy river overcome him, and he is drowned, the man who put the spell upon him shall take possession of his house. If the holy river declares him innocent, and he remains unharmed, the man who laid the spell shall be put to death. He that plunged into the river shall take possession of the house of him who laid the spell upon him." In the Holy Scripture, references to sorcery are frequent, and the strong condemnations of such practices found there do not seem to be based so much upon the supposition of fraud as upon the abomination of the magic in itself. The Bible provides some evidence that these commandments against sorcery were enforced under the Hebrew kings. "And Saul disguised himself, and put on other raiment. And he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul has done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits, and the wizards, out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? The New Testament condemns the practice as an abomination, just as the Old Testament had. Galatians chapter 5, verse 20, compared with Revelation, chapter 21, verse 8, chapter 22, verse 15, and Acts 8, 9, 13 and 6. The word in most New Testament translations is sorcerer, sorcery, rather than witch, witchcraft. Jewish law views the practice of witchcraft as being laden with idolatry and/or necromancy, both being serious theological and practical offences in Judaism. Although Maimonides vigorously denied the efficacy of all methods of witchcraft and claimed that the biblical prohibitions regarding it were precisely to wean the Israelites from practices related to idolatry, it is acknowledged that while magic exists, it is forbidden to practice it on the basis that it usually involves the worship of other gods. Rabbis of the Talmud also condemned magic when it produced something other than illusion, giving the example of two men who use magic to pick cucumbers. The one who creates the illusion of picking cucumbers should not be condemned, only the one who actually picks the cucumbers through magic. However, some of the rabbis practiced magic themselves or taught the subject. For instance, Rabbah created a person and sent him to Rav Zera, and Hanina and Hoshea studied every Friday together and created a small calf to eat on Shabbat. In these cases, the magic was seen more as divine miracles, coming from God rather than unclean forces, than as witchcraft. Judaism does make it clear that Jews should not try to learn about the ways of witches, Books of Deuteronomy 18 verses 9 to 10, and that witches are to be put to death, Exodus chapter 22 verse 17. Judaism's most famous reference to a medium is undoubtedly the Witch of Endor, whom Saul consults, as recounted in 1 Samuel 28. Divination and magic in Islam encompass a wide range of practices, including black magic, warding off the evil eye, the production of amulets and other magical equipment, evocation, casting lots, and astrology. Muslims do commonly believe in magic, or seher as it is known, and explicitly forbid its practice. Seher translates from Arabic as black magic. The best-known reference to magic in Islam is Surah al-Falaq of the Quran, which is known as a prayer to God to ward off black magic. Islam distinguishes between God-given gifts, or good magic, and black magic. Good supernatural powers are therefore a special gift from God, whereas black magic is achieved through help of jinn and demons. In the Quranic narrative, the Prophet Suleiman had the power to speak with animals and command jinn, and he thanks God for this gift, which is only given to him with God's permission. The Prophet Muhammad was accused of being a magician by his opponents. It is a common belief that jinn can possess a human, thus requiring exorcism, or a rakaya, as it is known, derived from the Prophet's sunnah to cast off the jinn or devils from the body of the possessed. The practice of seeking help from the jinn is prohibited and can lead to possession. The rakaya contains verses of the Quran, as well as prayers specifically targeted against demons. The knowledge of which verses of the Quran to use in what way is what is considered magic knowledge. In 1645, Springfield, Massachusetts, experienced America's first accusations of witchcraft, when husband and wife Hugh and Mary Parsons accused each other of witchcraft. At America's first witch trial, Hugh was found innocent, while Mary was acquitted of witchcraft, but sentenced to be hanged for the death of her child. She died in prison. From 1645 to 1663, about 80 people throughout England's Massachusetts Bay Colony were accused of practicing witchcraft. 13 women and 2 men were executed in a witch hunt that lasted throughout New England from 1645 to 1663. The Salem witch trials followed in 1692 to 93. These witch trials were the most famous in British North America and took place in the coastal settlements near Salem, Massachusetts. Prior to the witch trials, nearly 300 men and women had been suspected of partaking in witchcraft, and 19 of these people were hanged, and one was pressed to death. Despite being generally known as the Salem witch trials, the preliminary hearings in 1692 were conducted in a variety of towns across the province. Salem Village, now known as Danvers, Salem Town, Ipswich and Andover. The best-known trials were conducted by the Court of Oyer and Terminer in 1692 in Salem Town. In Maryland, there is a legend of Moll Dyer, who escaped a fire set by fellow colonists, only to die of exposure in December 1697. The historical record of Dyer is scant, as all official records were burned in a courthouse fire, though the county courthouse has on display the rock where her frozen body was found. A letter from a colonist of the period describes her in most unfavourable terms. A local road is named after Dyer, where her homestead was said to have been. Many local families have their own version of the Moll Dyer affair, and her name is spoken with care in the rural southern counties. Accusations of witchcraft and wizardry led to the prosecution of a man in Tennessee as recently as 1833. The Crucible by Arthur Miller is a dramatised and partially fictionalised story of the Salem witch trials that took place in the Massachusetts Bay Colony during 1692 to 93. Witchcraft trials frequently occurred in the 17th century Russia, although the Great Witch Hunt is believed to be a predominantly Western European phenomenon. However, as the witchcraft trial craze swept across Catholic and Protestant countries during this time, Orthodox Christian Europe indeed partook in this so-called witch hysteria. This involved the persecution of both males and females who were believed to be practicing paganism, herbology, the black art, or a form of sorcery within and or outside their community. Very early on, witchcraft legally fell under the jurisdiction of the ecclesiastical body, the Church, in Kievan Rus and Muscovite Russia. Sources of ecclesiastical witchcraft jurisdiction date back as early as the second half of the 11th century, one being Vladimir the Great's first edition of his state statute, or Ustav, another being multiple references in the primary chronicle beginning in 1024. The sentence for an individual who was found guilty of witchcraft or sorcery during this time, as well as in previous centuries, typically included either burning at the stake or being tested with the ordeal of cold water, or judicium aqua frigida. The cold water test was primarily a Western European phenomenon, but it was also used as a method of truth in Russia, both prior to and post 17th century witchcraft trials in Muscovy. Accused persons who submerged were considered innocent, and ecclesiastical authorities would proclaim them brought back. But those who floated were considered guilty of practicing witchcraft, and they were either burned at the stake or executed in an unholy fashion. The 13th century bishop of Vladimir, Serapion Vladimirsky, preached sermons throughout the Muscovite countryside, and in one particular sermon revealed that burning was the usual punishment for witchcraft, but more often the cold water test was used as a precursor to execution. Although these two methods of torture were used in the West and the East, Russia implemented a system of fines payable for the crime of witchcraft during the 17th century. Thus, even though torture methods in Muscovy were on a similar level of harshness as Western European methods used, a more civil method was present. In the introduction of a collection of trial records pieced together by Russian scholar Nikolai Novombursk, he argues that Muscovite authorities used the same degree of cruelty and harshness as Western European Catholic and Protestant countries in persecuting witches. By the mid-16th century, the manifestations of paganism, including witchcraft and the black arts, astrology, fortune-telling and divination became a serious concern to the Muscovite Church and state. Tsar Ivan IV, who reigned from 1547 to 1584, took this matter to the ecclesiastical court and was immediately advised that individuals practicing these forms of witchcraft should be excommunicated and given the death penalty. Ivan IV, as a true believer in witchcraft, was deeply convinced that sorcery accounted for the death of his wife Anastasia in 1560, which completely devastated and depressed him, leaving him heartbroken. Stemming from this belief, Ivan IV became majorly concerned with the threat of witchcraft harming his family and feared he was in danger. So, during the Oprichnina, which took place from 1565 to 1572, Ivan IV succeeded in accusing and charging a good number of boyars with witchcraft, whom he did not wish to remain as nobles. Rulers after Ivan IV, specifically during the time of troubles that took place from 1598 to 1613, increased the fear of witchcraft among themselves and entire royal families, which then led to further preoccupation with the fear of prominent Muscovite witchcraft circles. After the time of troubles, 17th century Muscovite rulers held frequent investigations of witchcraft within their households, laying the groundwork, along with previous Tsarist reforms, for widespread witchcraft trials throughout the Muscovite state. Between 1622 and 1700, 91 people were brought to trial in Muscovite courts for witchcraft. Although Russia did partake in the witch craze that swept across Western Europe, the Muscovite state did not persecute nearly as many people for witchcraft, let alone execute a number of individuals anywhere close to the number executed in the West during the witch hysteria. Witchcraft was also an important part of the social and cultural history of late colonial Mexico during the Mexican Inquisition. Spanish inquisitors viewed witchcraft as a problem that could be cured simply through confession. Yet, as anthropologist Ruth Baer writes, witchcraft, not only in Mexico but in Latin America in general, was a conjecture of sexuality, witchcraft and religion, in which Spanish, indigenous and African cultures converged. Furthermore, witchcraft in Mexico generally required an inter-ethnic and inter-class network of witches. Yet according to anthropology professor Laura Lewis, witchcraft in colonial Mexico ultimately represented an affirmation of hegemony for women Indians, and especially Indian women over their white male counterparts, as a result of the casta system. Witchcraft in Europe between 500 and 1750 was believed to be a combination of sorcery and heresy. While sorcery attempts to produce negative supernatural effects through formulas and rituals, heresy is the Christian contribution to witchcraft, in which an individual makes a pact with the devil. In addition, heresy denies witches the recognition of important Christian values such as baptism, salvation, Christ and sacraments. The beginning of the witch accusations in Europe took place in the 14th and 15th centuries. However, as the social disruptions of the 16th century took place, witchcraft trials intensified. Current scholarly estimates of the number of people executed for witchcraft vary between about 40,000 and 100,000. The total number of witch trials in Europe known for certain to have ended in executions is around 12,000. In early modern European tradition, witches were stereotypically, though not exclusively, women. European pagan belief in witchcraft was associated with the goddess Diana and dismissed as diabolical fantasies by medieval Christian authors. Witch hunts first appeared in large numbers in southern France and Switzerland during the 14th and 15th centuries. The peak years of witch hunts in southwest Germany were from 1561 to 1670. It was commonly believed that individuals with power and prestige were involved in acts of witchcraft and even cannibalism. Because Europe had a lot of power over individuals living in West Africa, Europeans in positions of power were often accused of taking part in these practices. Though it is not likely that these individuals were actually involved in these practices, they were most likely associated due to Europe's involvement in things like the slave trade, which negatively affected the lives of many individuals in the Atlantic world throughout the 15th through 17th centuries. Early converts to Christianity looked to Christian clergy to work magic more effectively than the old methods under Roman paganism. And Christianity provided a methodology involving saints and relics, similar to the gods and amulets of the pagan world. As Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe, its concern with magic lessened. The Protestant Christian explanation for witchcraft, such as those typified in the Confessions of the Pendle Witches, commonly involves a diabolical pact, or at least an appeal to the intervention of the spirits of evil. The witches or wizards engaged in such practices were alleged to reject Jesus and the sacraments, observe the witches' Sabbath, performing infernal rites that often parodied the Mass or other sacraments of the Church, pay divine honour to the Prince of Darkness, and, in return, receive from him preternatural powers. It was a folkloric belief that a devil's mark, like a brand on cattle, was placed upon a witch's skin by the devil to signify that this pact had been made. In the north of England, the superstition lingers to an almost inconceivable extent. Lancashire abounds with witch doctors, a set of quacks who pretend to cure diseases inflicted by the devil. The witch doctor alluded to is better known by the name of the Cunning Man, and has a large practice in the counties of Lincoln and Nottingham. Historians Keith Thomas and his student Alan Macfarlane study witchcraft by combining historical research with concepts drawn from anthropology. They argued that English witchcraft, like African witchcraft, was endemic rather than epidemic. Older women were the favourite targets because they were marginal, dependent members of the community, and therefore more likely to arouse feelings of both hostility and guilt, and less likely to have defenders of importance inside the community. Witchcraft accusations were the village's reaction to the breakdown of its internal community, coupled with the emergence of a newer set of values that was regenerating psychic stress. In Wales, fear of witchcraft mounted around the year 1500. There was a growing alarm of women's magic as a weapon aimed against the state and church. The church made greater efforts to enforce the canon law of marriage, especially in Wales, where tradition allowed a wider range of sexual partnerships. There was a political dimension as well, as accusations of witchcraft were levied against the enemies of Henry VII, who was exerting more and more control over Wales. The records of the Courts of Great Sessions for Wales, 1536 to 1736, show that Welsh custom was more important than English law. Custom provides a framework of responding to witches and witchcraft in such a way that interpersonal and communal harmony was maintained, showing regard to the importance of honour, social place, and cultural status. Even when found guilty, execution did not occur. Becoming king in 1603, James I brought to England and Scotland continental explanations of witchcraft. His goal was to divert suspicion away from male homosociality among the elite and focus fear on female communities and large gatherings of women. He thought they threatened his political power, so he laid the foundation for witchcraft and occultism policies, especially in Scotland. The point was that a widespread belief in the conspiracy of witches and a witch's Sabbath with the devil deprived women of political influence. Occult power was supposedly a womanly trait because women were weaker and more susceptible to the devil. In 1944, Helen Duncan was the last person in Britain to be imprisoned for fraudulently claiming to be a witch. In the United Kingdom, children believed to be witches, or seen as possessed by evil spirits, can be subject to severe beatings, traumatic exorcism, and/or other abuse. There have even been child murders associated with witchcraft beliefs. The problem is particularly serious among immigrant or former immigrant communities of African origin, but other communities, such as those of Asian origin, are also involved. Stepchildren and children seen as different for a wide range of reasons are particularly at risk of witchcraft accusations. Children may be beaten or have chili rubbed into their eyes during exorcisms. This type of abuse is frequently hidden and can include torture. A 2006 recommendation to record abuse cases linked to witchcraft centrally has not yet been implemented. Lack of awareness among social workers, teachers and other professionals dealing with at-risk children hinders efforts to combat the problem. In 2015, the Metropolitan Police said there had been 60 crimes linked to faith in London. It saw reports double from 23 in 2013 to 46 in 2014. Half of UK police forces do not record such cases, and many local authorities are also unable to provide figures. The NSPCC said authorities need to ensure they are able to spot the signs of this particular brand of abuse. London is unique in having a police team, Project Violet, dedicated to this type of abuse. Its figures relate to crime reports where officers have flagged a case as involving abuse linked to faith or belief. Many of the cases involve children. An NSPCC spokesman said, "While the number of child abuse cases involving witchcraft is relatively small, they often include horrifying levels of cruelty." The authorities which deal with these dreadful crimes need to ensure they are able to spot the signs of this particular brand of abuse and take action to protect children before a tragedy occurs. There is a money-making scam involved. Pastors accuse a child of being a witch, and later the family pays for exorcism. If a child at school says that his or her pastor called the child a witch, that should become a child safeguarding issue. Pagan practices formed a part of Russian and Eastern Slavic culture. The Russian people were deeply superstitious. The witchcraft practiced consisted mostly of earth magic and herbology. It was not so significant which herbs were used in practices, but how these herbs were gathered. Rituals centred on harvest of the crops, and the location of the sun was very important. One source, pagan author Judica Eels, tells that herbs picked on Midsummer's Eve were believed to be most powerful, especially if gathered on Bold Mountain near Kiev during the witches' annual Revels celebration. Botanicals should be gathered. During the 17th minute of the 14th hour, under a dark moon, in the 13th field, wearing a red dress, pick the 12th flower on the right. Spells also served for midwifery, shape-shifting, keeping lovers faithful, and bridal customs. Spells dealing with midwifery and childbirth focused on the spiritual well-being of the baby. Shape-shifting spells involved invocation of the wolf as a spirit animal. To keep men faithful, lovers would cut a ribbon the length of his erect penis and soak it in his seminal emissions after sex while he was sleeping, then tie 7 knots in it. Keeping this talisman of knot magic ensured loyalty. Part of an ancient pagan marriage tradition involved the bride taking a ritual bath at a bathhouse before the ceremony. Her sweat would be wiped from her body using raw fish, and the fish would be cooked and fed to the groom. Demonism, or black magic, was not prevalent. Persecution for witchcraft mostly involved the practice of simple earth magic, founded on herbology, by solitary practitioners with a Christian influence. In one case, investigators found a locked box containing something bundled in a kerchief and 3 paper packets, wrapped and tied, containing crushed grasses. Most rituals of witchcraft were very simple. One spell of divination consists of sitting alone outside meditating, asking the earth to show one's fate. While these customs were unique to Russian culture, they were not exclusive to this region. Russian pagan practices were often akin to paganism in other parts of the world. The Chinese concept of qi, a form of energy that often manipulated in witchcraft, is known as bioplasma in Russian practices. The Western concept of an evil eye, or a hex, was translated to Russian as a spoiler. A spoiler was rooted in envy, jealousy, and malice. Spoilers could be made by gathering bone from a cemetery, a knot of the target's hair, burned wooden splinters, and several herb Paris berries, which are very poisonous. Placing these items in sachets in the victim's pillow completes a spoiler. The Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and the ancient Egyptians recognized the evil eye from as early as 3000 BCE. In Russian practices, it is seen as a 16th century concept. The dominant societal concern those practicing witchcraft was not whether paganism was effective, but whether it could cause harm. Peasants in Russia and Ukrainian societies often shunned witchcraft unless they needed help against supernatural forces. Impotence, stomach pains, barrenness, hernias, abscesses, epileptic seizures, and convulsions were all attributed to evil or witchcraft. This is reflected in linguistics. There are numerous words for a variety of practitioners of paganism-based healers. Russian peasants referred to a witch as a chernozhnik, a person who plied his trade with the aid of a black book. Shepton, sheptonia, a whisperer, male or female. Lekar, lakaka, or narkaka, a male or female healer. Or zagovornik, an incanter. Ironically enough, there was universal reliance on folk healers, but clients often turned them in if something went wrong. According to Russian historian Valery A. Kivelson, witchcraft accusations were normally thrown at lower-class peasants, townspeople, and Cossacks. People turned to witchcraft as a means to support themselves. The ratio of male to female accusations was 75 to 25. Males were targeted more because witchcraft was associated with societal deviation. Because single people with no settled home could not be taxed, males typically had more power than women in their descent. The history of witchcraft had evolved around society. More of a psychological concept to the creation and usage of witchcraft can create the assumption as to why women are more likely to follow the practices behind witchcraft. Identifying with the soul of an individual's self is often deemed as feminine in society. There is analysed social and economic evidence to associate between witchcraft and women. We may never know whether or not witchcraft and witches were truly gifted with mystical practices. However, one thing that can be said with 100% certainty pertaining to the subject is the impact it has had on every society in every region of the world. Maybe that is witchcraft's greatest power and its purest form of magic.